So today I'm painting boats, or a boat rather, one boat on the seashore, because I absolutely love seascapes of all kinds and including boats. But boats are actually quite tricky to paint, mainly because of the ellipsis shapes on them. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that, but basically you can see first of all I've marked out the horizon, making sure that I haven't gone beyond my 1/3, 2/3 golden rule. So the golden rule is never put your horizon across the middle of your painting. Always have 2/3 sky, 1/3 sea, or lower landscape, or the other way round, or something like it, so that you obey the golden rule that was set in the Renaissance. And having done that, I marked in the boat, and I've started to mark in the sky, as I do, being pretty wild, I suppose, with my palette knife and my paints, because I've actually put all of the colours on the sky, which is a sort of a slight sunset, a bit of a moody sunset, not really bright, actually quite muted, but I've been using Payne's Grey, French ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, titanium white, a little bit of permanent rose, some cadmium yellow, and I've blended it all again together, and I'm softening it all, having patted it on with the palette knife, and I'm softening it with a fan brush. As by now you've probably learnt my style, so I'm going over it here. So I will end up with a basic sky, a basic background sky, and from that I will then go on and add in some more highlights and lowlights, standing back often to see what the effect is. That's something I always mention, and I particularly mention it to all my students, that sometimes you can be so up close and personal with the painting that you forget to stand back and see what the overall effect is, and sometimes the overall effect is perfect without you actually tinkering any more with it. So I always do that before I add in any more highlights and lowlights, but I will go over and get my basic background sky and then add in. So as you can see here, I'm actually adding in some of my highlights, some little touches where the sun is just peeping through, it's still coming through, highlighting areas, a little bit of golden highlight there. So I'm using cadmium yellow deep, permanent rose and titanium white to get that rosy colour. And you can brighten it up. If you have a very bright sunset, you would use cadmium red, and that will give you a much brighter, starker sunset. But I'm going for a very muted one. Going on to the putting in the horizon. Now I've marked this off on the canvas board. Now I've marked this off on the canvas, and I will pat in the top level of the horizon with my palette knife, and then move on down into the lower areas. So my lower areas, it's quite a purpley, light purpley kind of foreground here. So I've been using a mixture of French ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, a little bit of permanent mauve, some titanium white, and I've just muted that down. Now, because I underpaint in yellow ochre, I get the effect of the sand peeping through without me actually having to put any paint on, and this is why I rather like painting, underpainting with yellow ochre, because quite often if I'm painting seascapes, it's perfect for that, and it also gives this lovely warm feeling. So also I'm going to add in the darker areas, the shadows that I can see, and I can come back and I can tap in some more of that, but at the moment you see I'm just tapping them in lightly, also the highlights with my palette knife. So if I need a sharper edge, I use the very edge of the palette knife. I scrape it across my palette and I get a nice coating of paint on the very edge of the palette knife, and then I can tap that in and get a sharper definition. Or if I want less definition and more coverage, then I can use the flat of the palette knife. Soften that up a little bit with the fan brush, but not too much, because I actually like that texture. And then moving on to the boat. Right, the boat. As I said, boats are difficult, and you have to get the ellipsis right and you have to get the perspective right. Now I'm actually cheating a little bit here to get my nice straight point at the front, the prow of the boat. So I will use a ruler to do that, because there's nothing worse than a really wobbly line. But I will try to do freehand all the rest of it. And I'm looking for those nice arcs you get with boats. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, because we can touch in a little bit more and tidy it up. But I want to get the effect of the bowing of the boat itself, the rounded effect. So I get a feeling of substance and form. Now the colours on my boat are a combination of the colours that are I've already used in the sky and in the foreground, but I'm just sort of darkening them up in places with a little bit of Payne's grey, and in a few places I'm putting in a little bit more red, just to bring out the depth of that brown, that lovely brown we have on the boat. Now I'm not being absolutely precise with how I've painted this in. I'm leaving it a little bit impressionistic, so because we can look at it and the eye does fill in what we expect to see there. So as long as I put in what I'm expecting to see there as a boat, then it makes sense. A little bit of the cabin to add in, a little bit of fine detail, which I will also use my palette knife for, because I can get that lovely straight edge with a palette knife. Alternating between my larger palette knife, which I will use for paint mixing as well, and this lovely little triangular shaped one, which is very fine, and I can use it on very small areas and with much greater definition if I need to. So that works pretty well here, just tapping in the little bits of detail, just suggestions of detail. I'm not actually being really specific about them. And again, I can use the same little palette knife to just touch in a little bit more detail on that horizon, just to bring it out a little bit. Now, of course, there are always seagulls around boats and along seafronts and along beaches, deserted or otherwise. So I am sketching in some seagulls here. I will first of all sketch in the shape with white, with titanium white, so I know what my background shape is, and I can come back and put in the detail. Now I'm cheating a little bit because I have found some lovely images of seagulls in flight and seagulls actually on a boat. So I'm using them as my base. I've added them in, so they aren't actually in this painting. This is a little bit of my imagination working here, but I like this idea. I like this. I mean, I remember back to my childhood whenever I went to Sandbanks Beach and we went on the side which we called the boat side where all the boats were moored, and we waded around and we did a bit of mudlarking and crabbing, and there were always plenty of seagulls there, and they did perch on the boats, and so it brings back memories of my childhood as well, painting in seagulls. So I've got two on the boat here, one actually just perched, very reminiscent of the one I saw perched when I was on my travels around New Zealand, in one little harbour we went into, and it was a very, very bold seagull, just stayed there. The others I'm putting in flight, so it's a case of looking for the shading, the lights and darks when you're putting birds in flight. Although seagulls we think of as white, they are actually catching the shadow because they're semi-silhouetted against this sunset. So I to put in more darks than lights here. So just touching in those wings. I also need to touch in the wherever I've gone slightly over my lines, I can just tap it away with a wet wipe or a wet piece of cloth and just tidy my edges. I can also do that with any parts where I've put slightly too much of my white paint guidelines in, just to tidy it up again, and then obviously pick out those nice little touches that give the detail of the actual wings spreading and the bird in flight. Not forgetting the legs and the feet, because seagulls have this habit of being prepared to land, so they can make a quick getaway, I think, once they've landed and they've grabbed whatever it is they want. So just touching those in as well. Legs and feet are touching in with Payne's Grey and a little bit of Permanent Rose, Cadmium Red and Cadmium Yellow Deep, because you do get that bright orangey colour in there too. So once I've got all of my seagulls put in, I can go back and just touch in any tiny little details I think I need, or alternatively take out anything where I think I haven't got quite the right shape and the right impression in there. And there we go. I have 3 seagulls in flight, 2 on the boat, and I will just bring in 1 or 2 tiny little highlights to just bring out the fact that the sun is setting and the sun will be catching some of their feathers as they're in flight. I also want to make sure my horizon is absolutely straight, because it's quite prominent in this picture, and it does provide a nice contrast if I have a really defined horizon here. So I'm just touching that in. That's a little bit of permanent mauve mixed in with my other colours there, just to give that bit of definition. 1 or 2 other little spots on the boat itself, and then it's done. So I hope you've enjoyed this boat painting. I've enjoyed doing it. It's taken me back to my childhood, and you can see more on my YouTube channel, the 30-Minute Painter, and also you can see all my paintings on my website www.deborahmartin.co.uk.